Okay, good morning, folks. Okay, good morning, everybody. What I'd like to discuss today is a very important topic, and that is how the law of Ona'ah does or does not apply to non-Jews. We had mentioned previously that the law of Ona'ah is a special requirement to take care of and to not exploit my fellow Jew. So, and we spent some time, I showed you Max Weber, the sociologist at the early 20th century, was critical of the double standard of the Jewish businessman. And this is what, as he claimed, got us in trouble over the years. But the fact of the matter is that there is a double standard that halacha creates. It says you may not actively be deceptive to a non-Jew, but to make sure that he does not deceive himself, you're not obligated to make sure that he does not, through his ignorance, cause a lost opportunity. In other words, you're allowed to take advantage of an opportunity with a Gentile as long as he is not deceiving him, as long as you're not deceiving him, as long as he's deceiving himself or allowing his own ignorance to enter into transaction that is not to his greatest advantage. Now, there are limitations to this, and that's really leads into this halacha. V'chol din ona'a eino ela b'Yisrael. Aval nachri hato'eh b'shivui hamekach o b'shivui hamatbeya ein sarich lahodia to'uso. He says all the aforementioned halacha about ona'a, about giving full disclosure to someone that they could do better on the market, that they are not, that they that the fair market value is different from what this transaction is dictating. It only applies to a fellow Jew. But if a non-Jew makes his own error in the value of his commodity, so therefore he agrees to sell it for less than what it's worth, or b'shivoy hamatbeya, or even if he makes a mistake on the value of the currency that he is using, ein sarich lahodio ta'uso. You are not required halachically to inform him of his error. Shenemar al tonu ish es achiv. And the way that I know this, that there's this double standard, is because the Torah says no man should oppress his brother. And achiv v'lo nachri. And from here we learn that it applies only to one's brother, this higher requirement of the Isser of Ona'ah, and does not apply to a Gentile. Avol. Now, with all of that said, let's look at what the Rav Shulchan Aruch says regarding other types of unfair transactional behavior. Avol aser lahat'oso, but I'm not allowed to actively deceive him. Bein b'shivui mekach, bein b'cheshbon. Neither with stating that this is its value, like I'm not allowed to misrepresent its value and say that it's really worth X when it's really worth X times 10. I'm not allowed to misrepresent its value by telling someone, oh, this car that I want to sell you is worth 10,000 when it's really only worth 1,000. Bein b'cheshbon, or whether I'm deceiving him with amounts or value. Kamoshi yisba'er b'hilchos gezela. And this will be explained in more detail in the laws of theft. And similarly, any kind of misrepresentation, any kind of deceptive activity at all, when it comes to transactions, is prohibited regardless of whether the person is Jew or non-Jew. Kigon, im yesh mum b'mekcho, tzarech lahodia lelokeach, afal pishu nachri. He says, for example, if I'm selling a piece of merchandise and there's an unknown blemish or defect in the merchandise, I am obligated to notify the buyer regardless of whether he's Jew or non-Jew. Because by doing so, I am deceiving the person and I'm committing an act of what's called Genevas Das. Literally, it means I am stealing his knowledge. And what that means is that I'm causing him to think one thing when the reality is another way. Im eno modio, if I don't inform him, if I don't disclose. V'hareze kagoneg mimenu mamon, va'asr min haTorah, and therefore it is no different from stealing actual money from him. Just like it's usher to steal from a Gentile, as much as it is usher to steal from a Jew. It is also usher to deceive a Gentile, as much as it is usher to steal from a Jew. Kemoshi Yisbar Hilchos Gazela, as will be explained in the laws of theft, the laws of robbery. And so it's clear from the language of the Rav Shulchan Aruch that if I contribute to this person's lack of knowledge, then that is Asr min HaTorah. If he creates his own misunderstanding of the transaction, I'm not obligated to correct him. And that's the difference essentially between Jew and non-Jew. For a Jew, if I know that he's getting ripped off, I have to inform it to him. For a Gentile, if he wants to charge me X and I know it's worth much more, I'm not obligated to notify him that it is worth more. Okay, so now there are going to be qualifications to this, and there's a lot to discuss over here. There's a lot to unpack. So I just want to get started on the Imrei Yaakov, and then I want to move forward from there and see a few other things. So in Sifkat and Mem Gimel, the Imrei Yaakov states as follows: Ein sarich lahodio. I'm not obligated to notify a Gentile if he's making his own mistake on the value of the commodity or of the transaction. Uchedeisa b'Bava Kama. The Gemara in Bava Kama says this explicitly. Va'ayin sham d'Shmuel kana mizrak shel zahav mikuti. It's the case over there is where the sage Shmuel purchased a golden bowl from a non-Jew. Sheta v'chashuv shehu asay min hachoshes. The Gentile made his own mistake and thought that the bowl was made out of copper when it was really made out of gold. V'shilem lo kishivoy shel nechoshes, and therefore Shmuel paid for the value of a copper bowl and instead got a gold bowl in exchange instead. Now it's not that Shmuel told him, I will purchase that copper bowl from you. That would have been usher. But the Gentile basically said, here, this is a bowl. I'm selling it for $100. And clearly it was worth much more because it was made out of gold. It was the Gentile's own mistake. There, the Gemara says that Shmuel was not obligated to notify the Gentile that his commodity was worth much more than what he was charging. Aval asur lahat osa. But it is not permitted to deceive the person. And here the Imrei Yaakov brings you the background of the halacha. A Rav sasam kan lahachmir. So the Rav Shulchan Aruch is machmir on something that is the subject of machlokes. Avol be'emes shenechluku bazeh haposkim. But the fact of the matter is that when it comes to deception of a Gentile in transactions, this is actually the subject of a machlokes. The Zelashon HaRamah, as the Ramah writes in Shulchan Aruch as follows: To'us akum kagon lahatoso becheshbon o lahavkia halva'aso mutar. That it is permitted to deceive a Gentile in one of two ways. And this is a bit shocking when you read it. Kagon lahatoso becheshbon, to misrepresent the amount you're paying him or the amount that you're giving him, or to simply not pay him, pay back a loan that you owe him. So he says that's mutar, it's permitted, uvilvad shelo yivadalo, provided that the Gentile will never find out about the deception, the leka chilul Hashem, so that there's no chilul Hashem involved. So first of all, the Ramah's first opinion is that as long as there's no chilul Hashem, that the Gentile has no possible way of ever discovering that what I'm doing to him is deceptive, then technically it's permitted. So the first issue is that even according to this first opinion of the Ramah, tell me when you know for sure that the Gentile will never find out about the deception. How can you know for sure that he's never going to find out? So the whole halacha is bizarre in the first place, because how can a person know in advance that the Gentile will never find out that I deceived him? The only scenario that I think that you could create in your mind is if he comes back and he says, hey, you only gave me a $10 bill instead of a 20 that you're supposed to give me. I could say, oh, I didn't realize. I didn't know that what I had done. And there it was, you could say it was an honest mistake. And there the Ramah would say, as long as he's not going to suspect you, then according to this opinion, it's permitted. Now, this is quite shocking, but you have to understand, I believe, that this is a medieval attitude towards Gentiles who the Ramah lives in Eastern Europe. There are pogroms. There's the Chmielnicki massacres. There are multiple types of persecution that the Jewish people are undergoing, even in the lifetime of the Ramah himself. And therefore, this kind of halacha is in the backdrop of the type of Gentile that we do not encounter today. And it's for that reason that the Ramah even cites this more lenient position, because he is basically, the attitude is, before you stick it to me, we're going to stick it to you. Or because you've stuck it to me so many times, I have the right to, at least for my own survival, because you've confiscated everything of mine anyway, I have a right to do whatever I need to do in order to get it back. But let's first, okay, we'll talk about a little bit more about the sociology in a bit. Let's look now at the second opinion of the Ramah. V'yesh omrim da'asr lahat oso im ta'atzmo shari ad kamoshana. Then the Ramah brings the second opinion, and he writes that since you're not allowed to deceive, that genevas das, that you're not allowed to misrepresent something to a Gentile, so therefore you're not allowed to deceive him when it comes to not pay him back a loan that you owe him. Or in other words, I guess the argument is, the first argument is that that this is maybe not the same thing as genevas das, because you're not directly lying to him. See, genevas das is where you lie in the bald-faced lie to the face of the Gentile. That's what genevas das is. So some say that as long as you're not lying directly to his face and you just misrepresent something, so then it's okay. But the second opinion is no, there's no difference between genevas das, about lying to someone, deceiving them by saying something is X when it's really Y, and failing to pay them what you owe them, or misrepresenting the weight or the volume or the amount of something. And therefore, the second opinion is what the Rav Shulchan Aruch subscribes to. Hare the lefi deya harishona shehi bistama shari af lechatchila lahat oso. He says, according to the first opinion, you are allowed to deceive him as long as you're not lying to his face, but rather you misrepresent the weights or measures. Ulam harav nimshach kan achar divrei hashach sham, shehetik divrei hama'ar shal, dispirale diladina ha'ikar b'deya shniya. But the Rav Shulchan Aruch goes according to all of those opinions, the Shach and the Mahar Shal, who say that the second opinion is more correct. Okay, and therefore he writes what he writes in the 18th century. Uma kol shekain, heicha shahanochri shomer zayin mitzvos b'nei Noach. He says, but that is certainly true when the Gentile is a law-abiding citizen who observes the 7 Noachide laws. Uchemoshe kosav b'minchas pitim simin reish samich vav v'zel lashona. And as the Sefer Minchas Pitim writes as follows: Uma kol shekain be'umos sha'anu dorim beineihem hama'aminim b'Hashem yisbarach v'torah min hashamayim. He says it is certainly true that we must abide by the second opinion of the Rama when we live among law-abiding Gentiles who believe in God, who believe in a Torah that was given to us from heaven. Kol shekain sha'asr lahat osam, then certainly you're not allowed to in any way deceive or misrepresent. Kemo shekasav b've'er hagola uveshita mekubetzes bavakama kuf yud gimel b'shem ha'meiri ad kan l'shana. As the Be'er Hagola, which we'll see in just a minute, writes, and as well the Shita Mekubetzes, which is a medieval commentary to the Talmud, citing the Meiri. And we're going to get to that Meiri. I want to spend a little bit of time on the Meiri. The important thing you need to know about the Meiri is that he is a medievalist from the 14th, 15th century, but his commentary had been lost for many centuries. And it was only more recently found in the late, I think either the late 19th or early 20th century, from manuscripts that had been hidden away, and they were able to reconstitute the commentary of the Meiri. The Meiri was very well known in his time and shortly after his time, because he was quoted in a number of Sfarim, like a sefer called Shita Mekubetzes. But later on, many of his, a large percentage of his commentary was lost, only later to be refound. And so the Meiri's impact was limited in the medieval period because so much of his commentary had been lost, and only more recently it has created a greater impact on Jewish thinking. So before we get to that, though, I want to take a look at the Shar Hatzion over here, where the citation of the Be'er Hagola, I think, is very, very important. In Samach Aleph, the Be'er Hagola writes, he quotes the Be'er Hagola. Ayin Be'er Hagola simin shin mem ches katan daled. He says, if you take a look at the Be'er Hagola, which is a commentary to the Shulchan Aruch on this particular simin, you will see as follows. Da'achar shehevi divrei harambam u'v'sha'ar pirusham, that after citing the Rambam and many other commentaries who prohibit any kind of deception or misrepresentation to a Gentile, the Be'er Hagola writes as follows: Va'ani kosev zos l'doros. The following I write for all future generations. Shira'isi rabim gadlu v'ha'eshiru min hatoz shehitu ha'akum. Because I have seen a number of people in my own lifetime that initially got wealthy because of deceptive practices that they committed when doing interactions with non-Jews. V'lo hitzlichu, but eventually they did not succeed. V'yardu nichseim l'timyon, and eventually all of their money was destroyed or lost. V'lo hinichu achareihem baracha, and they left no remnant of blessing in their estate. And as the Sefer Chasidim from the 12th century or 13th century writes, Rabim asher kidshu Hashem vehechaziru ta'uyos ha'akum b'davar chashuv gadlu veheshiru, that there are so many people that the Sefer Chasidim writes who sanctified Hashem's name by returning mistakes that were made in their favor when they did interactions with a non-Jew. In other words, if the non-Jew accidentally gave them something that, gave them more than what they were entitled to, or sold them the object for far less than what it was worth. And they made a point of saying, as a Jew, I feel a responsibility to tell you that you've made a mistake and I want to return to you the over amount that you gave me. These people are the ones who became great and became truly wealthy, v'hitzlichu and successful, v'hinichu yisram la'olalehem, and they left their estate, a rich, wealthy estate, for their future generations. Ad kan l'shano, that's the citation from the Be'er Hagola. So the Be'er Hagola wants to make a point of telling us that even if a person can find a heter to get out of can find a heter of deceiving a Gentile, the fact is that it's not worth it, because you will never succeed in the long run from exploiting another person, even a non-Jew, by deceiving them. And that's an important adjunct to everything that we've just seen. There are some people who feel or have felt in the past that even if you could figure out a way to not pay your taxes, that's no worse than hafkaas halva. And hafkaas halva, which is the term that we saw up here, ola hafkia halva asomutter, that it, according to one opinion in the Shulchan Aruch, it is permitted to absolve yourself or abstain from paying a debt that you owe to a Gentile, as long as they won't find out about it. If you could figure out a way to beat the system and not pay your taxes, there are some Jews who are of the opinion that I'm allowed to subscribe to the first opinion in the Shulchan Aruch, the first opinion of the Ramah, that I can, if I can figure out a way to deceive without them ever finding out, without making a chilul Hashem, then it's okay, right? There's only two problems with that. Number one, that's not the consensus of the later poskim. Later poskim say that even hafkaas halva, even not paying, figuring out a way to get out of paying what you owe is usser to a Gentile, and therefore to a governmental entity, the same would apply. And the second problem is that even according to the first opinion, you have to assume that they'll never find out. And that's a very big assumption that you can't make, because quite often you think that no one will ever find out, and yet there are a lot of people who have ended up on the front cover of the newspaper because they thought that no one would ever find out. So this is
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Just on that point there, what about for all the people who do some sort of cash business? Even if most of their businesses on the books and everything, sometimes there's a little cash business for merchants, for all sorts of different people in business.
Yeah, that's a great question, Ron. And to my great chagrin, this goes on all the time within our own community. And that's called hafkaas halva. If a person has to charge sales tax on a commodity that he's selling by law, and he neglects to do so because does a cash business, so then he's committing what's called hafkaas halva. He is neglecting to pay what he owes to a non-Jewish entity. Now, it could be that the government doesn't mind when it comes to a once in a while kind of transaction that is made among friends. But if a person runs his entire business model is predicated on not charging, what's the word I'm thinking of? I don't know why it's escaping me, but the sales tax that we charge in Canada, what's it called?
HST.
He that's his entire business model, is doing business without charging HST unless he actually has to a vendor. So then that actually is relying on the first opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. And as we'll see, it's a very, very shaky heter. There have been rabbis who have permitted it. There are people who have told me that even in Toronto, you will not be able to see it in print. You will not be able to find it, anyone publishing this psak. But if you go to Rabbi so-and-so and you ask him verbally, he will tell you that it's okay. And I feel that this is extremely destructive. I feel that this is the source of a tremendous amount of chilul Hashem, and I feel that it's the source of what the Be'er Hagolah writes, a lack of success within the Jewish community. That if people do this habitually, then even if they want to rationalize it by saying, look how much money this HST is, that money could go to tzedakah instead, and I have a greater obligation to support my local Jewish institutions or my family or my grandchildren or whatever the argument is, it is a terrible, terrible thing. And that if that's the only thing that we're able to accomplish which is to tell people, pay your HST. Even if someone says, if you want, we can do a cash transaction. It's important for a Jew to say, no, I want to pay HST. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've told people who have given me the option over the last number of years, if you like, we can just do cash and you don't have to pay the HST. But if you want to pay on your credit card or if you want to give me a check, I have to charge you HST. So as a general rule, I always say, I don't care whether it's cash or whether it's credit card, I want to pay HST because that's the law of the land. And that's what I'm supposed to do. And that's what the government expects. That's how we pay for our health care. That's how we pay for our roads. That's how we pay for all the things that the government provides us for. How can I try to get away from it with it? And everyone else has to cover all of those essential costs, all those essential services. Okay.
So, Rabbi, I just want to point out another thing while you're on that topic, and that is it's not just HST that they're not paying or that you're not paying. The person receiving that money isn't paying any income tax either on that money. In fact, they're getting a deduction because of the loss, because on the books, that product just disappeared.
Yeah.
That's even worse than what you're saying.
Right. So you're aiding and abetting a larger system of fraud is essentially what you're saying, Wayne. And that's it's an important point.
And it's interesting because when in Canada, I didn't seem to bother me, but when I came to Israel, I realized I'm not paying the government, and it started to bother me. But it shouldn't. It should have really have bothered me all along.
Yeah. Well, listen, I don't know how to. I'm not sure how to get the word out that a Jew needs to pay HST. If you figure out a campaign that we can create to promote this activity without getting stoned to death in the forum of public opinion in the frum community, you let me know. But if we could accomplish that, instead of telling people, all of the things that we Jews, we know we do wrong. We speak Lashon Hara, and maybe we are involved in different activities that we shouldn't. Maybe there should be a campaign, pay your HST. And that could be if we could just accomplish that, I think we would fix a lot of the problems in the religious community.
But I think people try and rationalize sometimes. They say the government's not paying what they should for our schools, so they're unjust government. And our government is not an unjust government. I mean, there have been governments in the past that are unjust, but I don't think that applies to the Canadian or Western governments.
Yeah. All right. Let's pick this up. There's a lot that I want to share with you in this regard. So we'll pick this up in Mirz Hashem tomorrow.
Have
a great day, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.